So good afternoon, or good evening rather, everybody.
And so on.
Good evening, everyone. It's a real pleasure to welcome all of you on behalf of CCPL and Women's Studies Research Center. This is a jointly sponsored seminar, and we're really delighted to have Mindy speak to us today about gender gap in examination results and beyond, and why. I just want to give a little bit of a prefatory sort of remark about the work that we've been doing at the Women's Studies Research Center and also at the university in terms of focusing on gender equity issues. The Women's Studies Research Center, which has been constituted since 1994 at the university, so nearly 23 years, has consistently brought together policymakers, stakeholders from a variety of sectors in society, so both within the university community and outside, to talk about issues relating to gender, sexuality, and diversity, and to try and understand how we can apply these lenses in the work that we do across disciplines. One of the things that we found wanting in Hong Kong in general, but also at the university, is a lack of focus on gender-related and diversity-related issues in particular. And to that end, the Women's Studies Research Center has recently instituted a Gender Plus series of seminars, which tries to explore the intersections between gender diversity and sexuality as they emerge at different intersections or interconnections as we straddle different disciplines. And some of the focus of the work that has been done recently at the university has also been along similar lines, looking at how gender equity and diversity can be better enforced and incorporated into the university framework, whether we're talking about administration or teaching or research. And to that end, my colleague Gina Marchetti from the arts faculty has been leading a gender task force, which concluded its work in June of this year and presented a series of recommendations to the dean of the arts faculty, who set the task force up to do sort of an inward audit, internal audit rather, of gender equity issues within the arts faculty. They've developed, among other things, a number of resources and tools that you can access through the arts faculty website, and a huge bibliography, which I recommend all of you interested in these issues to sort of look at how gender and the framing of our criteria interact and how they lead to certain consequences and results for women. So that's all I'll say for now in terms of the Women's Studies Research Center. But one other side note is that our Vice Chancellor has obviously also recently made a very public commitment as part of the He for She global movement, and is also scrutinizing gender and equity issues at the university, and is thinking about ways to address some of the things that need addressing. So if you have thoughts emerging out of this seminar, or want to ask what is happening in your own department or faculty, whether you're a student or faculty, please do raise this with the persons in your senior management, because it's very important that sufficient people talk about these issues so that they understand that there really is something to talk about. All right, so without further ado, I'm going to pass on to our dean. Thank you, Michael.
When Pooja asked me to chair this, I was thinking, shouldn't it be a woman? Pooja said, no, you are the he in the he for she. That foreclosed the argument here. So I want to welcome all of you here, especially those of you who are not from the law faculty. And I see a couple of men here too. Thank you for coming here. In fact, it is more for you than for the women. So the thing about gender inequality is that it's not as easy to see as, say, racial minorities, because women are not a minority. So you see them all over the place, and whenever you speak to especially men about it, they will say, oh, but there isn't a problem. Look, there is this Nirmala, she was Dean of Graduate Studies. So she's doing very well, yeah, so there's no problem. That kind of thing, yeah, right? But I think Mindy will demonstrate that the figures show otherwise. Yeah. So, and I think we're very glad that she's here, and it's a great pleasure to introduce Mindy. Who's not only a professional acquaintance, but also a dear friend here. And Mindy, I think, is eminently qualified to say things about this. Yeah. She has been in sort of minority type situations all her life. Yeah. If I may recount just a bit of your Mindy was born in Taiwan, of Chinese extraction, as you can see, and at a very young age she went off to New Zealand, right? So a woman Chinese in New Zealand. As if that's not bad enough, she then transplants herself to Oxford. And you know how the Oxford snobs view people from New Zealand. And there you have it. So it's almost a minority upon a minority upon the minority. So I think Mindy is in an excellent position to speak not just from the figures, but from her own experience. I'm very glad that the Vice Chancellor is going to listen to all of this. So may I request that if there's any interjection or anything anyone wants to say, you have to use the mic, otherwise it will not be recorded. Okay, so just put up your hands if you want to say anything, especially at question and answer. And then I will give you this mic and then you'll speak. Otherwise, the Vice Chancellor will not hear what you have to say. That's provided you want the Vice Chancellor to hear what you say. Anyway, Mindy.
Thank you. So I've got this, okay? Thank you. Yeah, it's on. No, in fact, I'm an odd minority, okay. even as a Chinese person. When Oxford asked me to head the efforts to do an exchange program with Beijing, I said to them, I'm from Taiwan, I'm not the best person to ask to head this, I said they will be really disappointed, because when they think they're dealing with someone from Oxford, they will be very underwhelmed and disappointed that they're dealing with somebody who looks like me and who originates from Taiwan. And I mean, it's interesting, because even when I went to give lectures to the Taiwanese judiciary in April, I arrived in this posh car and I saw people lined up at the gate, and I thought, oh, somebody important is coming. And then I thought, oh, it's me. But when I got down, it was really interesting. They thought I couldn't speak Chinese, and they were saying to each other, she's awfully young. and so it's very interesting, the sort of I didn't fit the person they were hoping to get. Anyway, I want to thank you for coming. It is a Friday night, and I know how precious these are and how tired we all are at this time. So I hope it's going to be worth it. I hope the ideas will be stimulating. So I start from the point that a lower proportion of women than men obtain first-class degrees in British universities. The problem children, problem subjects, are classics, history, English, philosophy, law, maths, chemistry, and physics. This is the so-called gender gap. But there are lots of other manifestations of the gender gap. It's not only in examination results in top universities. I started talking to Michael and Terry about this, and Terry sent me some really interesting, he just found an article which said that women fail driving tests far more than men, but they are much safer drivers. So in 2014, a 17-year-old woman was 7% less likely to pass a test on her first attempt than a man of the same age, and it gets worse as she gets older. She's 20 years old, she's 15% less likely. 30 years old, she's 25% less likely. She's 35 years old, she's 41% less likely. And if she's 50 years old, she's 50% less likely to pass a driving test on the first go. And yet in 2014, male drivers were involved in twice as many accidents as female drivers, and accidents involving young men tend to be more catastrophic and to involve a lot of other people. Another example, I was reading the South China Morning Post. In spite of pledges to improve equality, in the pay gap in Hong Kong between men and women has widened since 2011. On average, women make 20% less than men, not counting domestic workers. And we know all over the place there are huge gaps in women in leadership positions, right? Even in professions that are dominated by women. So who are your top chefs? Who are your top hairdressers, fashion designers, even nurses? You know, the top nurses are now men. So my reaction to this is bloody outrageous, right? Why is it happening? Now, I'm not a social scientist. I do not claim to have any special expertise on them. I am a law professor. I have no expertise beyond the fact that I'm very interested in the subject and I've read up on it. So I come at it as a teacher of 31 years standing, in the East and the West, in the New World and the Old World. And I've noticed a few commonalities there. Girls are more apologetic, this is a really stupid question, they put themselves down a lot more, they need more reassurance. In tutorials or group work, if they're with boys, they tend to become less vocal, they're more differential, they don't want to be assertive and challenge and argue back. Boys tend to be the first in with the answer, they tend to say the first things, and the first things tend to be the obvious things, and they will repeat themselves. If they're challenged, they simply repeat themselves, whereas women will back off very quickly. Girls have a different approach to exams. Girls will get very anxious. I tend to walk around with each finalist and talk to them about their exams. And the girls will say, well, I know a lot, but I'm not going to get a first, am I? And the boys will say, I don't know anything. Now, how do I get a first, right? So I also come at it as a mentor for junior women in my faculty. And at Oxford University, they have a scheme of mentorship. It's called the Ad Feminam Mentoring Program, and I'm a mentor on that. I'm a speaker for the Springboard Women's Development Program, which is a program that Oxford University has brought in for women at all levels, academics, administrators, graduates, undergraduates. These are just programs for women. I think they're worth about £200 each, but the university pays for them. So this may be something you want to talk to your Vice-Chancellor about. I come at this subject as an immigrant. I remember as a 14-year-old in New Zealand, a teacher invited us and sort of to her place and asked us all what we wanted to be. And I said, oh, well, maybe I'll be a lawyer. And her husband, who was very well-meaning, said to me afterwards, now, Mindy, don't think you can't be a lawyer just because you're a woman and you're Chinese. And I thought, well, it didn't occur to me. Right? And obviously, as a woman, because I'm actually from a family of 4 girls, and my mother suffered a lot at the hands of her in-laws and Taiwanese society in general for having had very bad karma. She had 4 girls and no boys, right? And I remember my godfather saying to my parents, you must adopt my son and take him to New Zealand with you because, poor us, we only have 1 son between us. Well, I haven't spoken to him since. And my mother has always said to us, our entire lives, I think girls are as good as boys. And relatively recently, I said to her, Mum, I'm 50 now, can we stop that? Because she's protesting too much. She still feels the need to constantly say to her, girls are as good as boys. So gender has been an issue really all my life. And obviously, as a mother, I was determined that I was going to be raising warrior women, but as fate would have it, I got 3 boys, right? And who moan at me about feminism and what's all this about, So my life's quite complex, because they sometimes come to my talks and they say, "Don't you go on too much about feminism? I'm sick of this. Girls can do anything, And of course, my own experience as a Taiwanese woman from the colonies teaching Oxford law. And so in my time, I don't like to admit it, but in my time I've had to fight overwhelming feelings of not belonging, of not looking the part, of imposter phobia, they've made a mistake, I'm not really that good, I'm not one of them. And the thing is, it's not just paranoia on my part. Students and colleagues have variously expressed their skepticism or their disbelief that I am an Oxford law professor. I remember when I got a pretty plush research fellowship to go to Oxford for my sabbatical, a lot of my colleagues in New Zealand couldn't believe that I got this, and they were like, wow, why'd they give it to you, right? So I constantly got asked this one way or another, and I was like struggling to answer it. And when the last person said to me, so why'd they give it to you? I thought, well, I'm sick of this. So I said, because I was hot. And when I first got my job at Merton, I was so excited. I took my sons, who were at the time 4 and 6, I took them to the went to the gardens in Merton College, and an undergraduate came up and said, it's only for members of the college, and there was a bit of me that went, you twat. And then there was a bit of me that I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction, so I said, "You're absolutely correct," and I kept walking. So he, couldn't work out what I was doing there. But of course, for the next 3 years, he had to avert his eyes every time he saw me. I've had students who say to me, "Now, I don't mean to be rude, but why are you teaching us English law?" Right? It's not just paranoia on my part, Or I've had people who will say, "So did you just think from New Zealand, I'll apply for an Oxford job?" So there are ways in which people can tell you that they don't think you look the part. And even when I tell them that I've got a tenured job in Oxford, you'd be amazed at the number of people who've said to me, "So are you doing a PhD?" And I say, "No. Are you doing a PhD?" And we have this, surreal talk. And obviously I've been at conferences, and actually most recently one in Sydney last December, where it was just fairly typical. It was a 2-day conference. There were only 3 women speakers. I was one of them. Only 2 women made a comment over 2 days. Right? And women were very anxious about the high level of testosterone in the air. They just were too anxious to get involved. They didn't want to get involved. And it was interesting because and they also noted that when women spoke, the questions were far more dismissive. They were far more aggressive. So in my case, I gave a talk, and this guy got up and said, "I don't see what the point is of your talk," right? I'd like to say, of course I wouldn't give him the satisfaction, but I'd like to say the talk that I gave, the article it was based on has already been quoted in a Court of Appeal decision and has changed the law. But a man will have no trouble saying, "Well, I don't see what the point is of what you're doing," right? And then when he spoke, he had a very, very strong American accent, and I just couldn't catch what he was saying. So I said, "Can you just repeat that?" And he said, "I said that," and I thought, flip. And I said, "Look, I said I didn't hear you. I didn't say I was special needs." And I think he was quite, and then I was cast as being very aggressive with my response, right? So if we look at the research into reasons for the gender gap, Oxford is very concerned about this, and they have done a lot of research about it. And there are no definitive conclusions as to the causes of it. But there are a number of earlier hypotheses have been disproved. So the idea, people seriously thought that women had lower intelligence because their brains were smaller. There are studies that have disproved this. They had lower mathematical ability, that our selection processes are less good at choosing women, that that women have lower confidence, they have higher anxiety, that there are physical differences, that they have premenstrual tension, and that somehow explained it. So it's clear that women scored higher on negative emotions and academic motivation. They work harder, they're more anxious. Men scored higher on self-esteem, their perception of their own academic efficacy, and on risk-taking strategies. But these were not predictive of exam outcomes. In fact, they found that women who scored highly on trait anxiety and neuroticism were 4 times more likely to obtain a first. So if you're very neurotic, that's good, okay? And men, but on the other hand, men with high neuroticism were only half as likely to get a first. So that was an unexpected thing to come out of the research. So trait anxiety is a stable personality characteristic. People who are neurotic, whatever they do. And then there's state anxiety, which refers to a combination of worry and emotionality in response to specific situations like exams. And this can actually produce significant disruptions in your cognitive processes, for example, during an exam. So researchers have mooted many other plausible explanations, some of which may have resonance in Hong Kong. But a lot of them are insufficiently tested, or it's unclear how the operation might actually hamper women's performance. The only factor that had both a sex difference and predicted degree class was expectation of getting a first. So males tend to do better, and their expectation correlated with their actual results. So more men think they're going to get firsts. Fewer women expect to get firsts, at the start, it's really interesting, at the start of their course, 70% of men thought they had a realistic chance of getting a first, but only 20% of women, right? So everyone knows that you only get into Oxford if you are pretty good. So 70% of men coming in think they'll get a first, 20% of women. By the end, men have got a bit more realistic, and so have women. Men drop to 15% and women drop to 8%. But of those who think they're going to get a first, 54% of women get one and 71% of men. Okay? So the question is, what sort of psychological construct is this expectation of getting a first? And it does seem that women have a lower academic self-concept as opposed to a general self-concept. So an academic self-concept is context-specific. It's related to academic achievement. And general self-esteem has a social, emotional, and physical aspect, and it relates to general well-being. So I'm going to look at 3 points in relation to academic self-concept. So it's been found that women are more vulnerable during the transition to university. One study found that women's verbal and general academic self-concept declined markedly during their first term, while men's remain unchanged. So there's something about the university transition environment that makes women's academic self-concept drop. And students who lack confidence when they first arrive or who lose it shortly after are likely to underperform in their first exams. And what you achieve in your first exams is the most powerful predictor of what you achieve in the end. And women's marks are lower than men. And partly because what you do in your first exams put you on a different trajectory, right? Because teachers often react in mutually reinforcing ways. If you do well, they're going to pay more attention to you, mentor you, right? If you don't do well, they might just forget about you, right? So you end up doing worse. So students, why do students in general decline in academic self-concept? Well, obviously they were big fish in small ponds, and now they are small fish in big ponds, right? Everybody else is really good. But what they found was that, as I said, when they come in, they score significantly higher, and they are relatively impervious to change. And women declined considerably. So women were only half as likely as men to rank themselves in the top 30% of the cohort as men were. Secondly, women are more sensitive to others' opinions. They're more likely to interpret ambiguous feedback negatively. Men are less sensitive to negative feedback and anyway tend to overestimate their own abilities, which meant that they were less easily undermined by criticism. And I do find this, and sometimes if you say something small to a woman, they will start weeping. And sometimes when you say, this is terrible, the men will say, so it's just the structure then, So you mean I just got to get the structure right? Like we have to say, no, you really are really bad. Do you not understand, right? And I can tell you this. I mean, I see this in my own children, I remember when my son was like 2, and we were at the zoo, and my mother's like, much older than me, and I remember saying, okay, Zachary, we're off. And he said, but I'm not finished. And you think, and my mother said, gosh, I wish I had the confidence that he had, I remember once telling him off when he was a little boy, and he looked at me and he said, but you've hurt my feelings. And I said, I wanted to hurt your feelings, because, he just thought this was outrageous that you would hurt his feelings. And I remember, male students that I give low marks to, I've had more than one, half a dozen, will one way or another say to me, so this is your first year marking, eh? As in, you don't really know what you're doing, do you? That's why you've given me a low mark. So it's really interesting. It's quite hard to give that kind of feedback, Whereas women pay far more attention to feedback, and they're more likely to interpret ambiguous feedback negatively, right? Because I actually, just recently, one of my colleagues gave a talk here, and she said, it was terrible, wasn't it? And I said, no, it was good. And she said, no, it was terrible. And I said, no, and anyway, so what? She went, so you do think it's terrible, right? And this happened just last week, right? So, and we're talking about a professor here, right? So people have, it may be that women have preconceptions that they're expected not to be very good. And so, either from schooling, from broader concepts in society, and their preconceptions cause them to interpret similar treatment in different ways, okay? So a man might receive criticism simply as an indication that, well, this is what he can do next time, right? A woman might view it as confirming her existing sense that she's not as good. Okay, so the most important research is done around the idea of stereotype threat. The idea is that people are likely to perform poorly when they feel threatened or undermined. Students who belong to some groups may be aware of negative stereotypes about the intelligence of the group to which they belong, and they worry about performing poorly. And that if they do, this will confirm the stereotype. Okay? So, reading about this, it really gels with me that human beings want to have a sense of themselves as good people, as virtuous, as capable. And psychologists call this your self-integrity. And this is threatened by stereotypes that you people are lazy, or you people work very hard, but you're not very, and I got this in New Zealand, you Chinese, you work very hard, don't you? Which is a way of saying you've got no creativity whatsoever, you just work very hard. And now, people who are aware of this will be stressed by this, and they will try to suppress feelings of inadequacy, but this consumes cognitive resources, and it reduces their performance. So the main literature in this area is on African American students, right? And on women, on older people who are often thought to, be starting to lose their marbles, and students of lower socioeconomic status. So stereotype threat produces marked physiological responses that reduce self-esteem and self-concept. And a person doesn't have to believe in the stereotype to be adversely affected by it, because you become very aware that other people might or do in fact think that. So they might experience lowered performance expectations, dejection or disidentification, right? Negative thinking, intrusive thoughts, interference with their working memory, and self-handicapping. And this really gelled with me, because I remember before I went to Oxford, I really didn't want to go to Oxford, because I met these Oxford professors who thought they were just the cat's pajamas. They said, have you been to Oxford? I said, no. Oh, never mind, one day. And I thought, I don't want to go, And he was so, and I think he was told that, I was promising and I should think about going to Oxford. He was testing me. And it was clear that he was very skeptical. And his skepticism, I just internalized it all. And I remember at one point, he knew I was doing contract law and I had this project, and he said to me, after a while, I started feeling smaller and smaller and smaller, and he said, so Mindy, why do you think contracts should be enforced? And I remember saying, I don't know. So this is it, you get to the point where you don't even know the things you patently do know, right? And so there's also this idea that stereotype threat consists of multiple and separate threats that may be cumulative. So in my case, I think when he met me, I was a woman who looked young, who was Chinese, and I was 8.5 months pregnant, right? So all of those meant that my IQ was, went boom, 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 down very low. And the effect of lowered academic self-concept before exams is this idea that you think, I'm stupid, I need to learn more, you work longer and longer hours, your revision becomes less and less efficient, you don't exploit deep learning, you just kind of lose it, right? And so, as I've said, it impairs performance by creating cognitive interferences. And the more accumulation of negative thoughts, the more it worsens your performance. And what they found was that experiments could induce stereotype threat by reminding people of negative stereotypes pertaining to their social identity. So in one Canadian study, if they told women that sex differences in maths ability were innate rather than socialized, women did worse. In another experiment, when they received a maths test with a picture of a woman on it, they did worse, right? So just to be reminded of your gender meant that and that not only did they do worse on the maths test, they went on to do verbal, English tests and other tests, and they did worse all the way down, right? Now, here's the interesting thing. There are also signs of a sort of reciprocal phenomenon called stereotype lift. It raises the performance of levels of non-negatively stereotyped groups. And this reminded me of the research that showed that co-ed education, that girls do better in single-sex schools, but boys do better in co-ed schools, right? So if boys have girls around, that gives them a stereotype lift, right? And then I found some evidence that married men tend to live many years longer than single men, but married women live only a little bit longer than single women, and that in older age, divorced, widowed, and single women are healthier than their married counterparts. Remember that. So, very interesting. And it may be that Virginia Woolf is actually right in her book, A Room of One's Own. She says, women have served all these centuries as looking glasses, possessing the magic and delicious power of reflecting the figure of man at twice its natural size. Okay. I remember, I'll just tell you one that's sort of probably more information than you need, but I'm divorced, and I remember getting a lift with my ex to an event of our son. And I said, I'll sit in the back. And there was a woman with him in the front seat who, and everything he said, he's, quite boring, and everything he said, she went, oh, that's so funny. And he just blossomed. You can just see, he just blossomed, and she just was hanging on his every word. And I was in the back seat going, oh, that's what I did wrong. Okay. All right. So what are the causes of the stereotype threat? Well, obviously it's situation dependent, but stereotype threats arise from categorical constructions of society that contributes to the maintenance of existing social hierarchies. And research has shown that stereotypes relating to essential social identities like gender and ethnicity are absorbed by children long before they even reach school. So parents and schools play a really big role in enforcing or attenuating these stereotypes. And I'll just give you an example, again, from my own life. I remember when James, my eldest, was 5. He's now 28. But when he was 5, I said, right, go to the toilet. We're all on the way out to a day trip. He said, I don't need to go. I said, go. He goes, oh, I did need to go. I said, see, mothers know these things. And he said, but mums know less than dads. And I said, why is that, James? And he said, because mummies stay at home and daddies go to work. And I said, so where do you and daddy take me every morning, Monday to Friday? To work, he said. So it was very interesting that despite the fact that my then husband was having a year at home with them, he looked after them at home every day, and I went to work, he said that, right? So in spite of the evidence in front of him, this was what he was internalizing from playgroup, from TV, whatever. And I remember him watching Ninja Turtles. That was his favorite program, Mutant Ninja Turtles. And April was always getting into trouble, wasn't she? So at one point I was watching with him, and she's in trouble, and I said, oh no, that's terrible. And James said, don't worry, a man will come and save her. And damn it, but a man came and saved her, right? So, and the research shows that academics tend to think that women are less assertive, more cautious, methodical, conscientious, but also more fluent, communicative, and hardworking. Men, on the other hand, were described as arrogant, sloppy, risk-taking, and polemical, but also more confident, logical, objective, and focused than women. So male academics, well, academics in general, have these deeply rooted gender stereotypes that reflect masculinist academic values and that are likely to have some impact on the way we assess people. Some people have concluded that men are better trained for the transition to university. At school, they may have been encouraged to be more confident, more assertive, more argumentative, because teachers value these qualities more highly in boys than in girls. Girls are expected to work conscientiously and quietly in collaborative groups. Verbal prowess is really very important in seminars and tutorials at university, and girls with less used to the cut and thrust of debate, and the role of an assertive, challenging student is inconsistent with the social construct of femininity. And another study found that the adverse effect of stereotype threat on women varied according to the number of men present. All right? This is again the stereotype lift kind of idea. So students, they did an experiment with students undertaking maths tests, but in groups of only women, some men, a lot of men, you know, predominantly men. And they found that as the proportion of men increased, women's performance decreased. And men's performance remained stable across every combination. Okay, and this tallies with my experience in tutorials. So very often I'll have all female tutorials, right? Because they behave differently than if you put them with men. You know, and this is reflected in an experiment with high caste and low caste boys in India. They were asked to solve mazes in groups where the boys didn't know who the others were in the group. They solved them in equal ability. They showed equal ability. But if the caste identities were revealed, the high caste boys outperformed the low caste boys by 23%. So the only difference is you know that there are others in your group that are aware of your membership of a questionable group identity. Now this next bit I found really interesting, and which is that the question has been posed, why is it that some people appear relatively immune to stereotype threat? And what they found was that women for whom gender was not very important part of their social identity underperformed only slightly compared with men, but women who were strongly gender identified performed significantly worse, all right? So the more highly that women endorse stereotypes about female maths performance, obviously the lower their self-evaluation and the lower their grades. But even when women explicitly rejected the idea that men were better at maths, if they were highly gender identified with women, they did 33% worse. This is huge numbers, right? They think that 33% of the variance in performance, yeah, it's not 33% worse, but 33% of the amount by which they do worse was due to their high gender identity. Men's performance were not affected, although there was a non-significant trend for highly gender identified male to do slightly better. Right? So this is, to me, really interesting, because I've always had a theory which I didn't know how to put in politically correct terms, because I've always said, well, the problem is these kids are at mating age, right? And so you're looking for boyfriends, girlfriends, and women think, well, how do I appeal to men? I appeal to men by being sweet, nice, not challenging, not too, you know, not too difficult. And I read in the South China Morning Post this week that that more Hong Kong men are marrying mainland women. Now you might want to think why that is, right? So that your gender proportions in Hong Kong are becoming more skewed because you know, local men prefer mainland women. Why is that? Why is that? Okay, and of course this sort of gels with my own personal story, you know, because my father was like, I want boys. You are all going to be as good as boys. And we were not allowed to cry. He bought us boys' clothes. You know, I really hated him for that. But, you know, I used to walk around with a towel because we all had our hair cut really, really short. And because we were swimmers. But there was all this kind of, he did not want us to be girly, right? So actually, none of us four, I would say, are strongly gender identified, right? My oldest sister is a doctor who does mission work, and she runs her own she had 3 missions in 3 different countries. There's me, my next sister is the head of a teaching and learning unit at Canterbury University, and my youngest sister is the scariest one, because you've met her, haven't you? And she's a very high-profile lawyer in New Zealand. And she takes on the government and everything, and she's called the pocket battlefish, battle truck. Battleship, that'll do, yeah. Okay. So the introduction, what they've found is that the introduction of counter-stereotype role models would have a protective effect for women. So, and also identifying with a positive domain-specific stereotype is also helpful. So if women are encouraged to think of themselves as, you know, who are you? They don't think I'm a girl. They think I'm a student in a highly selective university. You know, if they are taught to think about this before their exams, they actually do better, right? When you ask 62 females to list 5 characteristics that men and women share, that had a significantly positive effect on them, right? So remember, you know, you grow up with Snow White, you know, Rapunzel, you know, the long flicky hair thing, and Snow White, what does she get? She gets taken out to the forest. She just goes. She stays with the 7 dwarfs. She cleans their house and she waits to be rescued. Oh my goodness, right? Who wants to be Snow White? You want to be Mulan, right? So there's lots of other interesting theories which I might just share with you if we've got a bit more time. So there's the idea, of course, of differential approach to learning, and I've noticed this myself, that women tend to go for deep learning. They prefer learning style is to build up from the basis, and they try to get to know everything. They think that the exam will just magically manifest how hard they've worked or how much they know. Whereas men are more likely to combine this with a strategic approach to examinations. They take a much more instrumental approach. Women tend to want more constructive feedback, clearer expectations. In fact, they found that higher teaching quality assessment scores significantly improved female but not male academic performance. Interesting. So women tend to focus more on personal understanding. They think the exam will be a byproduct of their own personal understanding. So they don't see it as a completely different task. Men are more likely to see exams as performance and as tailored to their own intellectual development to a public, and to tailor their intellectual development to public success. They take a more pragmatic approach, right? And so I would tend to say to my students, look, you're meant to jump through these hoops. Just jump through these hoops. The exam says to do this. Why are you studying that? That's not to be examined. Why are you studying that? You can't use that, right? You know, you've got 3 hours. How much can you write? How much is this long article going to help you? You know, be very strategic. There's also a theory that men and women write differently exams, and that examiners award these styles very differently. That women are hobbled by a cultural construct of femininity, which prevents them from making challenging statements. They are more diffident, they're more cautious, they don't assert themselves, they play it safe. So I remember, I mean, you know, some of these just bring back my own memories of things that happened to me. So I remember doing a research paper, and it was, you know, fairly polite. And then when I had a discussion with the professor, I said, well, of course, the judge was bonkers because he did this and he did this, and this is inconsistent with this, and they should have done that. And he said, why didn't you write that down? And I said, but that would be rude, you know? And so, you know, women have to learn to be rude, as it were. You know, it goes against the grain to say, of course, this is all rubbish, I'm right, you're all wrong, here are my 3 reasons, you know, boom, boom, boom. So in finals exams were seen as rewarding confident, bold, assertive academic writing, characteristics associated more with men, all right? And so I often say to my female students, look, it's blind marking. They don't know who you are. Pretend to be, if you can't do it as yourself, pretend to be somebody else, you know? There's also a thinking that teaching styles matter, you know, so in law, the very aggressive sort of Socratic teaching are not necessarily good for women either. That you need a welcoming environment, students need to have clear understanding of what's expected, they need to be given help to focus on the exam when the exam times are close, that you might need special exam sessions, right, that focuses on the exam. And that teachers play a really key role in monitoring gender dynamics and making sure that there's equal participation. because male students tend to dominate discussions in classes and tutorials. They interrupt more often, and they speak at greater length than women. I've just come from such a class, 3 hours, right? In classes, they found that with male instructors and a minority of female participants, men spoke 2.5 times longer than women. And that when women speak, they speak only in short bursts, they were frequently interrupted, and they were more willing to take turns, but also more easily discouraged from further participation. Men adopted a more competitive approach. They often interrupted each other, but they were more commonly succeeding in speaking until they had concluded their point. You'll see this in conferences. It's not the women who get up and pontificate. And, I remember this guy got up and he went on and on and on. And this woman, who's a judge, so she could handle this, she said, "Was there a question?" Which is a good response, right? And then there's some theories also about assessment methods, because they found that women are more hardworking, they're more introverted, that suggests that coursework might be a better way of examining. That if you examine by coursework, women will tend to do better than sudden death 3-hour exams. What about examination anxiety? That women get more state anxiety, that is the anxiety which comes with an event. Women recorded significantly higher than men over the course of their degrees. They were significantly more likely to change behavior during exams. Eating less or eating more, disturbed sleep, feeling ill, feeling upset. Women were more likely to report traumatic experiences like bereavement or relationship breakdowns before or during the exams. And one of the key pieces of advice I always give to my students, and actually one of my finalists is here, who's doing her Hong Kong degree here, but she got a first. But I was always saying to people, you do not have relationship breakups. Do not allow that to happen. Just take a break. Be selfish. Don't just focus. Be boring, be selfish, focus on what you're doing. Do not get into these, dramas. And what I found really interesting was that I had a woman student whose husband doesn't like the fact that she's going to be a lawyer, and so sabotages her. Just before her exams, he will make her cry and get her upset so she can't sleep that night, So I said, you move into college for the next, you tell him to piss off, and, you will talk to him after the exam. And this has regularly happened to her, So, what else? Well, if you've got high state anxiety, you also are very responsive to distractions, right? You are less able to block out non-relevant cues, and you are slower to shift your focus back to your original goals. So all in all, you start to compare yourself negatively with others, you contemplate failure, you worry excessively, you are worried about upsetting your parents, you then deploy weaker study skills, so it's all just a sort of vicious cycle. What else do I want to tell you? I mean, there's an awful lot here. It hampers their information coding, processing, retrieval during the exams. Women are more prone to perfectionism, right? They're hampered by trying too hard, excessive fear of failure. They were less strategic, we already know that. These university counselling services found that at the beginning of their final year, that 25% of women had these reported lots of non-academic social problems, and 16% of men. So there's a big difference. And this made women 8 times less likely to get a first, and made men 4 times less likely. So it's a few. Perhaps the last point is examiner bias. So they interviewed, as I've said, that there's academics have the sense of what's valuable, and also what women are like and what men are like. Now, this I found really interesting, that they looked at the language used in 312 letters of recommendation. So these are references, right? References you write. I write thousands of these things, you know, for students who want jobs, for colleagues who want jobs. And these were recommendations for male and female applicants for medical faculty position. The vast majority, 85% of the referees were male, and 96% of people on the appointments committees were male. So this is males writing to males. Letters recommending males were on average much longer, they were more detailed, and they focused more on research, ability, and careers than those for women. Letters recommending women used more gender terms, referred more often to their interpersonal relationships, teaching and patient care and patience and care skills seen as feminine. They contain fewer and less specific references to their research, more doubts, doubt-raising statements, and they contain more personal information that seemed strictly necessary. Letters for men contained a higher proportion of standout adjectives like superb, excellent, unique, but those for women were more grindstone adjectives like conscientious, diligent, meticulous, thorough. Okay? So this should cause us quite a lot of worry. And actually during the reporting on the Olympics, there were various articles about how men were described according to their skills, but women were often described according to their looks or their marital status or their age, all right? And when I was appointed, my colleague, who is a bit of a bastard, said to me, I was the only person that wanted you. Everyone else didn't want you, so I want you to remember that. Now, how do you start your career that way, okay? And he said to me, you know, your letters of references, they said things like, she's very enthusiastic. We know what that means, don't we? You know? So this is of course very undermining, right? I was told later that the decision was unanimous and he was bonkers. But, you know, this was his way of getting power over me, was to basically say, you owe me your job, you have to do what I say. Okay, so the other thing is that assessors, when they tested them, they found that examiners often could identify the genders from the handwriting. And therefore, there might be some unconscious bias coming through. So, what do we do about this? This is always slightly depressing. Well, for students, I would say a couple of key pieces of advice. Think about who you are, you know, and, you know, hopefully being a woman is not like number one in your gender identification, number one in your identification when it comes to how you perform in the university. Modeling. And I often say to students, look, think of somebody you admire and you respect. What would they say? You know, I regularly say this to my students, you know. You don't say, oh, I'm only a second-year law student. Well, this is very difficult. On the one hand, they say this. On the other hand, they say that. I really do hope a court will sort it out one day. Full stop. No, you don't say that. You say, okay, I am Lady Justice Hale, and I say, you know, so you take on a persona, and you say, you know, I think this is a difficult question. On the one hand, this. On the other hand, this. On balance, I think this. These are my 3 reasons. Boom, boom, boom. Right? So it's about taking on a stance, talking to examiners as an equal, right? Not as an inferior, as an equal. You know, I disagree with this proposition. These are my reasons. You know, everybody else is crap. I'm great, right? So do a little bit of, you know, what the guys do, right? So, and women in particular need to ask, how do I get a first? And think strategically about this question. I remember that I got a ridiculously high mark in my first year in legal history. Like ridiculously high mark. And everyone thought I was some legal history genius, so they would send students who had problems to me. And in the end I said, please don't send me anybody. I only know 4 essays. I only know 4 questions, because I spotted them, I figured out, I decided what was going to be, and I learned everything about them, and I only know 4 points. So I am an entire imposter. I don't know anything about this. And practitioners, when I was making this terrible self-confession, said, you're just the sort of woman we want, because you're the sort of person who knows how to get the maximum results out of minimal amount of work. I felt so much better. But you see, you just got to think, this is, you know, what I'm going to do. Learning is different from passing exams. It's an entirely different enterprise. Okay, what about the faculty? Well, I think the faculties, the universities need to really think about induction, all right? How do you prevent a drop in your students' academic self-concept? How do you make them welcome? How do you help them integrate? You know, our university has, our college has what they call parent systems. So every student has a mother and a father from the year above, so it's like a mentoring scheme. And they write them letters and they meet them and they talk to them, things like that. I think the university needs to provide lots and lots of models to counteract the stereotype threat, because the research has shown that if you have contact, but it has to be personal contact, with real life own gender experts in mentorship programs, then this will provoke self-enhancement and inspiration, because they can see that it can be done. They've seen it done. Thirdly, you need to frame negative criticism carefully to women. You need to give guidance. You need to be very careful about what you're saying to people. You might want to reconsider assessment methods. But actually, and I'll finish with this, that Oxford has found, and I think Hong Kong needs to do the same, that you need to keep on monitoring your gender gap. That having statistics would help. You need to get the statistics and you need to figure out which direction it's going in. And more importantly, simply making people aware of the issues, aware of the literature, put their emotions, their feelings in context, that really helps. I mean, reading this stuff helped me, you know, at my very grand age, making sense of some of the things that happened to me, you know, made sense of some of the things, you know, it took me a long time before I could say, no, it's not me, it's you, right? You know, lots of times when I would read things and think, oh, I'm stupid, I don't understand this, these people are all much brighter than me. And after all I thought, damn that, you know, I'm an Oxford professor. If I can't understand that, maybe it's you, right? Maybe you haven't made this clear to me. And I think it's about how you know, I mean, part of it is I know how to put on an act when I need to, and then I could go back to my room, curl up in a fetal position in the dark, you know, and think, oh, that wasn't very good, you know. But you need to be able to perform when you need to perform, and I've just performed. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mindy. I know that Mindy is expecting a very exciting Q&A, so I will move straight into that. Please raise your hand. I'll hand the mic over to you. Remember, you have to speak into the mic, otherwise it will not be recorded. Are there any?
Hi, my name's Glenda. Question first, maybe it pertains more to Hong Kong as well, is that like the general perception is that there is not a lot of gender inequality in Hong Kong, given that like legal-wise, it's quite women's right is quite protected, and then also women is quite well represented in political governments, political parties, and also senior management of the corporates. So, like my perception of like among my friends is like feminism is an overblown. Women are a lot of times they're just like complaining all the time, and I think that's how actually like some of the aversion towards feminism is coming from. So how do you think we can tackle that?
I think you need to look at the figures, because, you know, when I first came and mentioned it, you know, I said that when I went to Singapore, they said there are more women than men admitted, but in fact, when you look at their dean's list, there are 20 men to 5 women. Why is that? And actually, you found the same here. This is shocking, right? That you've got far more women, and they do very well, but when you look at Dean's list, when you look at who's actually getting to the top, right? When I gave this talk in Singapore to some students, the women students said that when the big judges came along and their tutors were like getting them to mingle and to network, that the tutors couldn't remember any of the girls' names. They could remember the boys' names when they were introducing them, couldn't remember the girls' names, you know? So, I mean, this is all, I know we're not supposed to say it, but and so you get reactions like my sons who say, oh, I'm sick of you all guys going on about that, you know? But the statistics are there. You've got a 20% gender gap. Another woman said she was told, she went to a law firm, that you're never going to make it to the top because you're not going to be able to go drinking and doing the after-hours things, that the slightly unsavory things we boys might get up to, and we network, and you won't be part of that, so you won't get to the top.
Hi, I'm Daisy. I'd just like to respond to that comment just now. I feel like we in Hong Kong do have the perception that females do have sort of more of a chance to get to higher places, but at the same time there is a lot of subtle, I don't know how to describe it, but gender inequality in terms of stereotyping that's going on. Just a very simple example, the TV was on last night, and there's a TVB situation drama that happens every evening, and the whole episode was about how this woman had to find time to go and hang out with her friends to get their nails done, and it's just the general perception, this general perception of women as sort of needing to, getting together and doing girl talk and gossiping about others, which was also something that they wanted to do. Fair enough. I think there are people who do that. I think that's fine. But the way that females are portrayed on TV. And the second example I wanted to raise was my experience with girls that went to the same degrees as I did. The people around them see them as usually ambitious, the word that they describe for someone who has gone to the BCL, has gone to a top chambers, is always ambitious, and ambitious always comes with these connotations which are not so good. Like when you say a man is ambitious, usually it sounds like he's strong, he's directed, he's doing what he wants. But like a female who's ambitious is sort of like, there's something negative about she's edgy.
Well, in Oxford, I am known as the she-devil.
Yeah, until you prove otherwise. Like there's a good friend of mine who's in this position, but she's well known to be someone who just wants a family, and then everybody says, oh, she's normal, she's not ambitious, she's just in that position because she's smart, but she actually wants to have a family and she's normal, And so I feel like that sort of thing, it's very subtle, and you don't really, you can't really pinpoint it at any point, and it puts you down a little and you don't know how to express it, but I think that really is still very present in Hong Kong society.
Be the gentleman here. The he here.
Thank you, Professor, for sharing with us. So my question is, you have been giving a lot of advice to the girls in this class, right? To the guys, what do you think? Is there anything that you see which is not too nice, or whether probably is not too good, conducive for our fellow female classmates? So probably the guys should take note when they are attending classes.
Well, I think it's obviously both, right? It's things like not interrupting women when they're talking, right? Making sure that women have a chance to talk in small groups, making space, because women generally won't fight for space, right? If they have to fight for space, they won't fight for space to talk. But men will fight for space, I don't know. I suppose I'm always telling my sons off. I'm always telling them how they should treat women, and particularly their girlfriends, But, women, when you get along a bit further, no woman can be an extraordinary woman without an extraordinary man, actually, unless a man is prepared to also pull their weight in the family. Because you're not going to experience much now. It's when the babies roll along that women really go down, right? They really go down. Because I was always being asked who was babysitting my children. My husband was babysitting my children. You wouldn't say I was babysitting my children, right? So the language and everything, right? These sort of, I can give you a million examples, but it's until men are prepared to take their paternity leave seriously, do the childcare equally, yeah.
Also, thank you for the talk. Regarding your advice to students, for girl students, that we should be more ambitious, confident, and we should be more like men, and we should find for role models. I feel like it's placing burden on women. It's like victim blaming. Like, we are already trying very hard, but it seems like we are the ones who are blamed. I feel like more blame should be on the boys and the system that places pressure on these girls.
So I do think that teachers have a huge role in tutorials in making sure that women participate, right? So those in my class will remember that I will often say, this question is for those who haven't spoken before now, or this question, you know. I agree with you on that, but I think part of it is also that actually it feels good to, it might feel like the way you call it victim blaming, that's very loaded, right? But I'll tell you, I did an experiment. So after the Sydney conference, where it was so overt, I decided at the next conference I would behave like a boy. So I decided that no matter whichever the paper was, I would put my hand up first. And I would say the blindingly obvious thing, right? Because you get to say the blindingly obvious thing if you put your hand up first, and you sound clever. So I thought, no matter what it is, I will put my hand up and I will be the first. And I will pontificate away like the boys. You know, I will have a script of what I'm going to say, and I will say it. You know, I came out of that feeling like master of the universe. Honestly, I thought, oh, hey, I could do that. Because often I felt very intimidated by the guys that were in that conference. But having just decided I was going to do it, right, I thought, yeah, can do that. I can do it if I want to. I just don't want to. But I think you should try it. Try it. I'm not saying to you, be aggressive. I'm just saying, be assertive. Don't let boys talk over you. If you've got something to say, say it. You know, watch what they're doing. It's clearly having an adverse impact on women. Exam results. In general, I don't like dwelling in this subject, you know, because it makes me feel bad, right? So I don't generally pay much attention to this subject. But if you look at the stats, you look at, you know, you often see in supermarkets, you know, middle-aged women being bossed around by some young man, right? Why? Why is that, right? This happens so often. And to me, it's a matter of self-respect and dignity, right?
Thank you for your talk. It's very interesting. I just want to mention 2 points. Clearly, girls and boys are getting into elite institutions in equal numbers. In fact, there are more girls who get admitted, but the boys are, you know, doing better. They're getting first. There's no doubt about that. But actually, at secondary school, we're really concerned that boys are falling behind. So I just want to make that factual point. You know, when you look at results, you know, from large-scale studies done over the world pizza, you know, so we are concerned about this. The other point you made, I think, is really important about you know, participation of women in classes. Now, what's very interesting when they do these studies, they find it's female teachers actually inadvertently discriminate against female students as well, because that's why this whole thing of girls do much better in STEM when they're in single gender schools. It's because the boys are not getting the teachers' attention.
Yeah.
And I think actually, I'm in the Faculty of Education, we try to make female teachers very aware of the fact that they are in fact discriminating against women students, female students, inadvertently by giving more attention, at least in STEM.
Yeah. I think in STEM, in everywhere else actually, because, you know, no, I've got 3 or 4 different things floating around my head, and consequently it's been stirred up and now I have nothing. Okay, so they found, you know, stereotype and unconscious bias is there because it's unconscious, right? So the research shows that they did some research on women philosophy professors, and they found that even they think women are not as good at philosophy as men, right? And I had this momentary thought the other day that if I came across a Taiwanese woman who purported to be teaching at Oxford, what would I think of them? You know, would I be skeptical of them? Probably, you know. And as for the boys doing not as well at school, I mean, I have fairly creative children who, you know, the first two, they were like, yeah. Anyway, some of my class know about this because we were talking about the fact that some of them one of my sons played truant in the class, and the school tried to put him on contract, and I was like, this is enforceable, you know. But I think that's got to do with maturity and emotional development, right? Rather than, girls just mature much quicker, earlier.
Sorry, just to say that boys tend to get more caught up in things like video games, Nintendo. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Joyce, and I think I agree with the female role model point very much. I think that's very important because I've had endless role models in my life, and they're all probably female. And I agree with, is it Daisy? Point about how the media, especially after I graduated from the LSE and I came back to Hong Kong, and I'm flooded with all these really, really racist and also sexist mass media kind of influence flooding in Hong Kong. And I think the most important thing is that people in Hong Kong generally don't really have that awareness in that. They probably think that, oh, women are already having a lot of rights, a lot of representation on the media, but that they don't really pay attention to the subtle references. And even in the Western media field, I think probably if anyone watches House of Cards here, I think probably Claire Underwood is the only character in TV history or entertainment history that a woman actually wants power or wants to assert influence for the sake of in her own rights, instead of for any family reasons, for anyone else, or for anyone else.
And is she admired, or is she seen as a bit?
Yeah. Well, of course, like in a lot of my friends see her as oh, she's devil. She is very evilish, very manipulative. That's the very common word to be used. But I mean, role models are very important because I think, as Mindy said, that it shows to you that this can be done. And I think really Hong Kong U at least should lead this in raising awareness in especially doing female mentorship program. I think that would be very important, and especially important if the female role models are relatively young and more approachable, because it's probably not very meaningful if you get like a really established female role model from
yes, that's why I think this sort of buddy program, or the parent system. Yeah. So maybe the second years will look after the first years, and so on. So the second year JD should have,
or even just young graduates looking after undergraduate students. I think that would be quite meaningful.
I mean, it's well known. Can I just say that that when a minority group gets to less than a third, they're seen as in the majority. Right? So if you have 3 women in a meeting of 10, people think there are a lot of women here.
Oh, hello. My name is Irene. I do echo with you about girls being educated together with boys. I have experience of noticed that the girls disappeared when they went to co-educational college because there were more boys receiving prizes at the stage, and the girls weren't getting many, and the girls tend to be shorter, and therefore there's very little impact. So I did feel that perhaps the boys were overshadowing the girls. Anyway, my question is, all these gender differences that you talked about, that we should try to be more aware and conscious about it. How do we ensure that by doing that, we wouldn't be infringing the law on equality? Do you see what I'm saying? Because obviously, it would be a case of in your mind having some sort of positive influence as a result
Well,
of
I
the
don't
gender?
think so. If you're aware, for example, that women are more sensitive to ambiguous criticism, right? You know, you can, like as I say, you can say to a man, "This is terrible," and they go, "But it's mostly good, isn't it?" You know. But if you say to a woman, "Well, you know, this bit here, you know, maybe," and they go, "Oh, you hate it." I think if you're aware of that, a good teacher tailors their feedback to the student, to how they will receive it. I don't think it's, and anyway, what is equality, right? How can it be that if you're being responsive to women, that you're being unequal, right? Because currently we're unequal. That's the point, right?
Hello, my name is Terry Khan. It's a gender-neutral name, but I was quite taken by your point about assessments, coursework versus sudden death. I do think that there may be an issue in the way that we do our assessments, especially in the form of final examinations and the coursework, because I think that inherently that kind of assessment is competitive and adversarial, and that is not necessarily something which women, I mean, generalize, they feel as comfortable with as men, because I think men instinctively think in competitive ranking terms, and even their peers, whereas I think women do not generally have that kind of approach. Your thoughts?
Well, I mean, it's made me think, you know, I'm based on the research, and I'm only reading it. I think you're right. But, well, number one, they're more conscientious, and that's partly why they're doing better at school as well as at university. They're more conscientious, and so the conscientiousness should come out in the coursework. You give them a bit more time. I guess that's right, because I find that if I look back over my 25 years in Oxford, the number of women I've had to say, "Do you know that you are first-class material, that you will get a first if you take a strategic approach?" Whereas, yeah, they don't see themselves in the frame. They don't see themselves as you know, they don't want to join the competition. That's just sort of what you're saying, yeah. But it is making me think that I should give you 5 days instead of 3 hours for your midterm. Go on. No, I think he's... Yeah.
Do you think it's bad that our system encourages this kind of strategic approach, since, as you say, like passing, getting first in exams isn't learning, or isn't the same as like personal learning?
Well, that's a very big question, right? The problem is we need to assess you in some way, right? We could do education, right? But in tutorials, but most people need an incentive to work, and you're right. It's a means to an end, right? It's there to help you learn. It's there to it's there for the professions to assess you. We're helping your employers work out who is better at X, Y, and Z. So in lots of ways, it's not really our core job, right? It's not really our core job. Our core job is to educate, of course, but given that we can't do the discipleship model, you know, Plato and so on, and there's so many of you, but I hear what you're saying completely, right? That you can study strategically for the exam like I did for the legal history and no bugger all, right? And get a really good mark. Now that's the problem. But I'd like to think it didn't mean nothing. You know, it meant that I could, but that's the nature of life, isn't it? If we're going to assess you in this particular way, you have to do. If they say jump through these hoops, you jump through these hoops. I mean, I had terrible trouble with my own children, who were purists, and who was, like I was saying, just do what they ask you to do. And they were like, but that's so dishonest, Mum. You know? And this is the problem, you know? And yeah, I mean, I remember my youngest, you know, and he was asked to do the states of matter, you know, to do what were the states of matter. And he gave them 6. They only wanted 3. So he got it wrong, you know. And I said, look, boys of your age know 3. Just write 3. He said, but there are 6. You know? So you have to be somewhat pragmatic about life, you know. Play the game. It's a game. The exam is a game. It doesn't. There is no way in which it really assesses you.
I'm all for sort of playing the game, and I've heard this phrase and used it often as well. But I think that the nature really changes when you're talking about promotion, in the context of promotion and advancement of your career. You say, well, if you have to play the game, then you have to match the criteria that the men are being judged against.
Right.
And we know already from research on student evaluations and even publications and the kind of work that you do, there's a certain value attached to the field that you're in, even in law. I mean, gender and, I can tell you, multiculturalism, that's not necessarily taken as seriously until very recently.
Yeah.
So, you know, you can want to play the game, but that, at least for me, has meant in the initial years of my career, not really being true to the field that I feel most strongly about, and probably am better at, and instead dabbling in areas that are the more sort of traditional fields to write about. So it's really a hard thing to navigate until you wait for the system to catch up with what really ought to be an aspect of human flourishing, where you encourage inquiry across the board, right?
Well, I say to my children, do what you have to so you can do what you want to.
Thank you, Mindy.
Sorry.
Just a comment that there are a lot of women's society, women association professionally, like Women's Society, the Women's Foundation, Federation, but it's never in the primary school, secondary school, or even universities, which I think it's pathetic. It's sad, as in, like, we don't do that. Like, we do it when it's too late, because if you want to reverse the cultural stereotype, like even among women themselves, you should start early before it becomes a self-perpetuating stereotype. So, yeah.
Sorry, I just have a very short question to ask. You know, I think in the broader context, not just in school, but, you know, a lot of girls, just like one of the comments that the other said, that, you know, women are usually encouraged to be like men. And there's this criticism of this point of view that, you know, women should not be educated to act like man, for example, in like leadership style, or, you know, a lot of different just treatment of life in general. They shouldn't be encouraged to imitate, you know, men leadership style.
I agree with
then
that.
How, you know, what is your advice for that? I mean, like, what do you think?
You just live your life. I don't want to live like a man, right? I mean, I just live my life. I mean, in Oxford is the ultimate male place. Colleges were designed for bachelor dons, right? Bachelors. So they dined. And I remember being told off by the warden because I hardly ever came in for dinner, right? Coming in for dinner every night. And I said to her, look, you're proud of the fact that Oxford is changing, that we have women and we have people with young children. Why is it that you want me to behave like I'm not, right? Why do you want me to come in, why do you want me to behave like a bachelor don who comes in and has dinner with these? I want to be at home with my kids, right? So sack me if you want, right? I think you just have to live your life. You know, my kids come with me when I go overseas. They know about times when, you know, when my son was 5, he'd fly everywhere with me and he'd hide under the table when I was teaching. And one time I was getting assessed, and this was by some big wig in the professions, and he said to me years later, I don't remember what you said, I do remember your son was under the table, you know. So I think you have to just live your life. Think what works for you, and you can't be listening to what other people say. It is very difficult, though, because, you know, in my own area, if a man says, I have to leave at 3 to pick up my children, everyone goes, oh, he's such a good dad, he's such a good... But no woman would dare run off at 3 o'clock to pick up the children because you're not being professional, you know? There's all of these things. I think it's very difficult. But I think it's, for me, what happened was that when I got my job at Oxford, I made a decision. I thought, I don't know how I got here, but I don't want anything and I don't need anything, right? And I made a decision that I was not going to be influenced or be scared of anybody, and I would just live my life. It meant I got into a lot of trouble, but you know, I think ultimately people, you just live your life, basically, right? And you have to think every step, what's the right thing for you? You don't want to be like a man. Why do you want to be like that? You know?
Well, thank you. That brings us to the end of this session. Thanks for staying today. Mindy is now ready to answer the question, why should contracts be enforceable? We will discuss that over dinner. Thank you.